Welcome to the Evolving Man podcast. My name is Alan DeMonto, and I'm the founder of The Awakened Man. What do doormats and reverse narcissism have to do with each other? Well, they're both indicators that you could be codependent. And codependency is more than just people pleasing. It's about when we give so much that it causes us pain. And today I'm going to interview for the second time Mary Joye on the eve of her new book. So today's episode is definitely a must listen. But before we get into all that, I just want to remind you of our brotherhood, the Band of Brothers. This is our community of strong, resilient men, where each man is dedicated not only to his growth, but the growth of his brothers as well. Now, currently, I'm on a bit of a hiatus and just about ready to release the next intake for the Band of Brothers, but more on that down the road. In the meantime, if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, a husband, and an entrepreneur, then I encourage you to participate in the Hero's Quest. It's a 90-day mentoring program aimed to improve at least one aspect of your life. Now, where can you find all this stuff? Well, you can find it at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members, that's plural members, .theawakenedman.net. And with that, let's get on with today's show.
Today's man knows who he is, where he stands, and what he aspires to become. Solid in his convictions, owner of his destiny, ever evolving into husbands and fathers our wives and children expect and deserve. We are the masters of our life and the leaders of our homes and community. Welcome to the movement. Stay strong, my brother.
Well, God, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and paying attention to today's podcast. I'm really looking forward to it today because I have a returning guest, Mary Joye, who's a licensed mental health counselor from Winter Haven, Florida. Now, Mary specializes in trauma, grief, and life-changing events, and her approach integrates cognitive behavioral therapy, PTSD trauma resolution, and other proven techniques. And the reason I got Mary back today is that not only does she have a thriving life coach practice, but she's just finished writing her first book, Codependent Discovery and Recovery 2.0, which is going to be coming out in stores later this month. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mary back to the podcast. How are you doing, Mary? It's been a long time since we last spoke.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. I'm glad to be back. You have a wonderful audience, and I hope I can serve them well today.
Well, I'm sure you have. I had lots of positive feedback from our first interview, and it was, you touched on so many great things that affect men in general, but also everyone. And so it was really good. And I have to say, I have to thank you so much for sending me a copy, for such a heavy topic that you've shone a light on what codependency really looks like, not only just through your story. And boy, now I got to tell you, everyone, like that's a real life hero's journey. And I just have to express that. But you also provide tools and tactics to help everyone recognize and free themselves from codependency. So I thought we'd get started today by asking you to tell us how you came up with the idea to write the book and what was your purpose really for writing it?
We'll start with the purpose first. The purpose is so no one had to suffer like I did for as long as I did.
Yeah.
And I got some good feedback from the DailyOM class, and I saw that I had touched a nerve on an e-course, and I decided to expand it. But what gave me the idea? Two things. The beginning of my journey was when a professor told me that I was codependent, and I didn't even know what that was. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just being nice. And she said, no, they're going to walk all over you. And I would know I'm the daughter of an alcoholic. So she was a neuropsychologist. I listened, but I didn't listen well. It was a process. It's been a long process. That was a long time ago, almost, oh boy, probably 15, 20 years ago. But then my brother passed away by a horrible, tragic circumstance. In fact, I don't like to usually tell people because we really don't know what happened. But I was forced to tell all of my family secrets through that because we're never really sure what happened. And standing in front of his tombstone, I realized I had kept all these family secrets for him, for my parents, for everyone but me. And so when I got to the great state of Texas and had to tell all this stuff, they looked at me with such disbelief. And I said, wow, who have I been protecting all these years? Obviously not me. So I decided, standing there in front of his tombstone, which I didn't decide to write the book then, but just standing there, I said, you know what? Family secrets are highly overrated. And this is going to be a process out. And I was broken. I was on the ground crying and sobbing. I was by myself. I called friends on the phone, but it just wasn't enough. And then I said, later, I realized, I said, I'm glad Texas was such a big state because I had to tell our family secrets to it. And we had a lot of secrets. So,
Wow.
yes, it was an investigation. And you kind of have to tell everything that you know about your sibling. So it was rough, but maybe, about 4 years later, I decided to not write about that, which I doubt I ever will write about that. But I certainly had to tell pieces of my story, and I said, okay, it's going to be cathartic. It's also going to be horrific, but it's also maybe going to help some people. And I hope that other people learn to tell their stories and quit protecting people that may not serve their best interests, if that says it all there.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And reading the book, the first few chapters really grabbed me because I didn't realize you bring so much light to codependency, and I didn't realize in my behavior and in the relationships that I've been in as well how there are aspects of being that I've been codependent, and maybe and I'm sure there's a spectrum of that would exist on. But
Yes.
you brought so many things I just wouldn't have considered. And so if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind getting into a little bit about the book
Go
today.
right
And,
ahead.
and well, actually, we're going to get into a lot about the book today. And the first thing I had for you is that in the book, you mentioned that the book was a holistic and a structured from this eclectic and evidential viewpoint. So that's what you're talking about right now.
Yes.
But you said you built it to teach and to learn how to live and give well in a supportive way, to mind, body, spirit, Trinity. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you mean by that Trinity.
Well, we do have a mind and a body and a spirit, and people who even tell me they don't have a spiritual life, and I always am very open to people who may be closed to thinking they have a spiritual life. I tell them your moral compass is your spiritual life. If you go, and I don't mean to be graphic saying this, but if you go to a funeral, what's missing in the coffin is the person's personality, which is what we call spirited, right? If someone's
Right.
spirited, it's their personality. So everyone has some sort, we know we have a mind, we know we have a body, but for anyone who doesn't understand that spiritual side, it means way much more than a religious side. And I love that you said I used eclectic and evidential, because I did that because it was not only my healing process, I use it with my clients that come in that are codependent. I also individualize it because not everybody can have a one size fits all, which is why the book does build on each chapter. So each person can develop their own treatment out. This is truly self-help because they're writing their own endings of each chapter in a bullet point list that they keep.
Absolutely. And yeah, we're going to get into that part as well. And what I really liked about how you wrap the spiritual side of it is that you gave permission for those of us that struggle with the big G word
Yes.
and want to use the big S word instead, and then that we can still find that. And you're absolutely right. You can find that spiritual sense and have it feel all right for you. So I thought that was just so astute of you to put it that way. Now, I know that you had a general idea of what codependency is all about, right? And so as a therapist, but someone who's lived as a codependent, how would you really define the term?
Well, briefly, it's a loss of self while caring for others.
Hmm.
Anyone who relates to that, are you giving out till you burn out? Pretty much. Or
Yeah.
are you giving to get back affection? Or do you ever say, because there is a spectrum, you're correct. And that there's a whole chapter on the spectrum, but you're either a doormat at one end of it, or on the other extreme is the controlling, I know what's best for you, and here's what you need, and here's what I would do if I were you. Both of them are giving to get a relationship they want to keep, and that relationship may be toxic because it's based on a fear of abandonment. So I would say that would be the briefest definition: losing yourself, caring for others. And the symptoms are varied, but
Yeah.
they are, when people hear them, we'll probably be going through them today. Some of them, they'll go, oh, okay. Because everybody is a little bit codependent with someone.
Absolutely, for sure. Like when you were going through the description of doormat, and I just recently had a post on my Instagram page, and speaking about one of the days I speak a lot about my marriage, and I admittedly stated that at the beginning part of my marriage, for sure, I was a doormat, and that's how I treated it. And I learned that behavior from watching my father interact with my mom. And it's not that it's just that he was that quiet guy, and I knew later on in life, when him and I had an opportunity to speak, that he had thoughts and ideas about how things were, and he didn't always like the things that mom would say to him. But as I think in his mindset, it was better to have not fought in front of us kids as
Yes.
opposed to stand up for what he believed in. And so I took that and really didn't understand what he was doing and was emulating that in my relationship. So I really didn't stand up, and I was really looking
Wow.
for the love and support and the validation from my wife. And it took a major life event for me to wake up and for her to wake up that, hey, we can't coexist this way, and then
Wow.
and so when you were talking about that, I was just like, man, that was me all the way, like 100%. And I just think that how many men are like that we see something in a relationship from our parents or somebody that's important, authority figure, and we don't really understand the dynamic behind it, but we're emulating it. And how much is it
Yes.
killing us, right?
Yes, role modeling. What a powerful story, Alan. Your story is powerful too. And I was the doormat type as well. And a dear friend of mine, I hope this sheds some humor to it too, who was a male, Michael Powell. He looked at my ex-husband, who wasn't my ex-husband at the time, but he said, "Mary isn't something you stand on to ring a doorbell." And I thought, wow, how
Mm,
profound. And I wasn't ready for someone to defend me. This was many, many years ago. I was not a therapist yet, and I appreciated the defense. So, yes, we role model these things. I thought I was being good and obedient and all those things, but
yeah,
no, it's
absolutely.
unhealthy.
Yeah. The other part that I noticed that you spend a good amount of time in explaining and helping us understand is this concept of codependency being like reverse narcissism. And I thought, wow, what a great way to put it. And so I wonder if you can explain to our listeners today what you mean by this codependent being a reverse narcissism.
Well, I came to it one day when I was writing the book. It came to me while I was writing it. I was looking at what I wrote. I was going back over it at the end of the day, which I do. I write in the morning and then I look back over it at night, and then I put it away and then I edit it later. Um, but I said, wow, I'm writing about codependence, but this is narcissism in reverse, because codependents are hyper focused on other people. Are you okay? Are you mad at me? Do you still like me? Do you want me? Do you need me? Call me if you need me. If you need anything, let me know. And narcissists are all about, if I need something, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
They're hyper focused on themselves, both driven by a fear of abandonment, by the way. This is why the dance is so profound. This is why they just instantly attract each other, and like a magnet, like polarity. Magnets repel or retract depending on which side you're on. So,
Right.
very much like in the law of physics, watch out who you're magnetized to. And we call it magnetic personalities and attraction. And oh,
Yeah.
wow, it's just like magnetism, chemistry. We'd say we got great chemistry. Watch out for those instant attractions, because they could be reenactment from your childhood stuff, just like you discussed today, reenactment from watching your dad step aside and not having the vocabulary as a child to um, understand what was going on. You did in retrospect, but wouldn't it have been nice if he'd have been different? But he probably learned it from someone else too.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So it's just so interesting that, and you have a great little table in the book as well, where on the one side you've got traits, what a narcissist is like all about, and then how that mirrors for a codependent. And I thought that was just so profound that to go back and forth between the two. And so I was just like, man, like that's another indication to me of this. Sometimes we think that codependency is this one part of, like, it's that, well, if you're a doormat, then you're codependent, but you have so many nuances that have
Yes.
brought light to it. I went, man, I think we got to pay attention to how we interact in all of our relationships. And am I doing this from a place of validation? And so if I'm doing that, you know what does that say about where I am in my healing journey, and what do I need to work on? So I wanted to get into a little bit more about, like I mentioned in the introduction, that you've got lots of life experience. So you wrote this book through not just your own educational path, but really coming from the heart of your own life experiences. And you had three people that I gathered from that really affected and really propelled you into this journey of codependency. Two of them were your parents,
Yes.
and one was your ex-husband. And I just thought if you wouldn't mind sharing with us a little bit today about some of that story behind and how to help us understand in our own lives how that relationship as children and in relationships can impact us being codependent.
Well, they certainly can. And it's funny because imprinting from your childhood can happen in the most, um, I would say, like you said, a subtle nuance of ways. My father's best friend was a rancher and a pilot. So I met a cowboy, a magnetic personality. He was a record producer. I was a singer. And he was very much like my mother. And my father, like your father, was more of the people would never have expected my father to be the codependent type more so than my mom, because he was a self-proclaimed narcissist. My father was a psychiatrist and looked at me one day and I said, "Why are you so mean sometimes, Dad?" And he said, "Well, I'm a full-blown narcissist and I have no intention of changing." And I was like, wow, it's not like he's a carpenter. I mean, he knows what he's doing. So it was kind of liberating in a way because I never really had to please him anymore. But with my mom, the dynamic was different. So this man that I met as a record producer, because my mom was enamored with show business, she hung a star on my door from the time I was little. And I said, "No, I really just want to be a writer and a songwriter and an artist, not a star. I want to be an artist, someone who's respected." And I knew that as a teenager, that the subtle difference of that. But no, I thought I had it all under control. I met this man when I was, probably 29. We married at 31. I stayed married to him for 20 years. And he had been talking to my mother behind my back. He was so much like her. You have to dress how I say to dress. You have to do what I say to do. And please don't be offended. In Texas, our house looked like a Texas steak restaurant because he was from Texas. And I'm an animal lover. I don't judge people for anything, but
Yeah.
it was very hard for me to live in that house. Oprah magazine covered this, that we had buffalo, I mean, real huge with the fur on them, bison head on the wall, deer. I, it was like a Sam Peckinpah movie. I was so, I was an animal lover. And here I was, I'm a beach house kid living with a man like this. And about every 6 months, he would become uncorked. And though he never, ever punched me or hit me, because that was my, that was my don't do that or I'll leave. He shoved, he pushed, and the name calling and the berating and the belittling and demeaning. I wasn't allowed to scuba dive. I wasn't allowed to go fishing on a trip with my brother. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. I wasn't allowed to talk to certain friends. And 20 years of that, I finally just gave up. He accused me of cheating on him. He accused me of lots of things. And you finally just give up. And I made lots of mistakes after I left him. I had to develop an exit strategy and I was ill-equipped. But I will tell you, when I went back to school during that relationship, I found there were names for this stuff. And the professor, thank God for that professor. And if that's the G word offends anyone, thank the forces of nature that brought me together with that professor.
Yeah.
Because I certainly could have had a different professor that would not have told me that. And she pulled me up after class to tell me that. And then little by little, I was brave enough to share with some of my professors who were all psychologists what I was going through in my home, because my husband left me and went back to Texas in the middle of my internship with no money. He took the horses, and my other professor said, "I bet you miss your horses." So I, oh, terrible to laugh at, but I needed him to do that. It was like a
Yeah.
really kind
Perspective.
slap. Yes, yes, yes. I'm so thank you, Dr. Wilson. Yeah, he said, "Oh my gosh, your husband left you in the middle of your internship with your horses. I bet you miss your horses." I said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, now, yes."
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And you really get into, some pretty interesting detail on your life. And what I like about that, like I said earlier, is that it really gives some context about some of the things that we may have experienced in life. And one other area you talked about, you said in AA, it's often said that you're only as sick as your secrets. Now, I hadn't heard that before. And, but what does that mean? And how does that manifest in people's lives?
Well, when you keep covering up your secrets, they will eventually come to the surface. They just do. And it makes you ill, because if you feel guilty about something, it makes you ill. I felt guilty about things. And when you share them with somebody, it's like, oh, that's what therapy is good for. You don't have to tell your friends all your secrets. A therapist is bound by law to not tell your secrets. And we can't, we'll lose our licenses.
Yeah.
So it's good to tell someone your secrets. It'll lift that off of you, because if you make decisions based on that guilt or that shame, because in the words of Brene Brown, is guilt says I did something bad, shame is I am bad, that those secrets will put shame on you. And many times when you have a perpetrator as a child, like I did, I was molested as a child, and it set me up for a lot of false shame and false guilt. And my mother decided to protect that person, and that was a total turning point in my life. I went from a happy kid to a shut down teenager, not rebellious or angry or mean or anything, just completely shut down. That these secrets that we keep, we're not keeping them to protect ourselves. We're keeping them to protect a family unit that didn't protect us. Hopefully somebody got that. I just felt that go out there.
No kidding. Absolutely. Now, you just mentioned also that you're a singer and a songwriter. Took you a little while to find your singing voice, it sounds like. And
Yes.
but tell us how you got involved in the music business, who your mentors were, and how you used music and songwriting to go help you work through your codependency and work through and really bring you to the other side.
Oh, thank you for that question, because that's like a past life to me, only it was in this life. But I love that part of my life, and I still do sing around the house, and I do write meditation music, and there are meditations that go with this book. But my venture into the music business, I could always write songs. I wrote my first song when I was 12. And I think that especially children who live in any kind of traumagenic environment, I don't know any songwriter who hasn't had a difficult childhood. And I think, like in a musical, how it's so emotional, you break out into song. I think that's how songwriters are born, because if you asked any songwriters I know, we don't know how we write songs. We cannot tell you how that came to us. So I had to learn to play an instrument. I had to learn to sing. But the person that taught me to, I went through many vocal teachers, but the first person that taught me to sing was in New York. And my mentors, believe it or not, I worked for KISS when I got out of college. So Gene Simmons was like, I used to tell him, you're like a tormentor who is now a mentor, because we had no Me Too movement back then. And he was, he did like the ladies. And, but because I was able, back then, I was not so much the doormat. And, he helped me find connections, because he did like the way I sang. He heard me singing in the dressing room, and he said, I didn't know you could sing. I said, well, can't everyone? He said, I didn't know you could write songs. I said, well, can't everybody write songs? I really believed everybody could write songs. I didn't know. I was only in my 20s.
Right.
So he helped me step out of New York in the heavy metal music, because it was like Gidgey Goes heavy metal. I should never have been in that world. But I was a theater major, and they hired a lot of those. And I didn't do drugs or alcohol, which he didn't either. So he did help me go into Nashville at the mid-level. So, your tormentors can become your mentors. And, those are the people that these are the people that you should pay attention to. They'll help you be independent. They are the most, just like we talked about in our last session, we talked about that Joseph Campbell model. And one of the hero's journey, part of that is unlikely mentors. He was a very unlikely mentor for me, because he was a tormentor who became a mentor, like wax on, wax off.
Yeah.
He was like a
you've had
Karate
some,
Kid.
absolutely. Yeah, I really like the anecdotes and the stories you talked about, how Gene was there to support you, and you even have some verses and some songs that you wrote as you were going through some of your life experiences that I really appreciate you putting into the book. And hopefully there's an opportunity for us to get a chance to listen to some of these songs. I'm sure they sound outstanding. So would really look forward to hearing that.
Well, what amazed me is the book cover is a bird in a cage. They had a red bird with the cage door closed. And I said, can we make it a blue bird flying out of the cage? Then they said, can we make the blue bird with the door open, sitting, looking out? It has more motion and more emotion with less motion. What they didn't know, the art director, it took an hour to choose the cover. It was amazing what they did. What they did know is inside the book, I had written a song. I mean, my lyrics were in there about a song I had written called Bird in a Cage. A bird in a cage may not be crying, but she sings a sadder song and she longs for something more. A bird in a cage keeps her eye on the door. So, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Synchronicity.
Yes.
Now you also get into something else that I'm really interested in when I do some of my men's work, and now you talk about attachment styles and how they can play a part in our codependence journey. And so, how does that really manifest for us as adults?
Well, attachment styles are almost always talked about in children. It's usually something we talk about. The kid has an insecure attachment, or the kid has this kind. Well, we carry these attachment styles into adulthood if we haven't healed our child selves. And there is an inner child healing in the book. And I talk a lot about integrating I call it accessing your higher adult self, access your adult. We all hear about access your inner child. No, you need to access your inner adult too, the one that would protect you when you couldn't. And so the attachment styles we carry, if you are codependent, are usually insecure. Like do you like me? Are you mad at me? Like we talked about earlier. Do you need me? Do you want me? And it's always this, please, please, please love me. And then some codependents, on the other spectrum, the more nagging type, they're like, I don't need anybody. I don't need anything. I don't need anyone. When that's not true either. They're all fear-based. Both of those are fear-based. And what we're looking for is secure attachment. Usually they get involved with someone who has dismissive avoidant attachment, like somebody gets too close and they push them away.
Yeah. Yep, totally can relate to that. So my wife and I actually did an attachment style class together. It was quite funny looking at each other's style.
Yes.
Yeah, I can totally see that in you.
Yes. And there aren't that many. So people can, and we, like in different relationships, you vacillate between different styles.
Absolutely.
You do carry them and you learn them from people in your childhood or your adolescence.
You betcha. Another part of the book, you talk about, really you're talking about the father wound. And so one of the things that I see when I'm working with men is that men who have fathers who are dismissive or abusive, or even they felt neglected, they tend to become codependent. But you also feel that being that obedient family member, where we're keeping the family secrets, can also cause that codependency, like you talked about earlier. So I was wondering if you can just speak a little bit about that, especially for men who may be having the challenge of a father wound and how that codependency piece may show up for them.
Boy, I certainly understand the father wound. As I said, I'm going to just preface this with a story about the father wound. When I did not tell my father, the psychiatrist, I was in graduate school for psychology until about 3 months after I graduated. And I called him and I said, you and I are going to have a talk and we're going to put the cards on the table. And that's when I told him, you weren't a carpenter, So I sat him down. He did apologize. He was much older. And I did have 10 good years with him after that. But that father wound is serious because if we excuse fathers. My father always taught me, act like a lady, think like a man. You don't need anything from anyone. Men die, men leave. And he was an abandoned child. My father was abandoned when he was 4 years old by his mother. She left him in a grocery store. It's like you couldn't leave him at home. You had to leave him in a store. So he carried this with him, imposed that on me without really expressing to me where or why these came from, these thoughts, the act like a lady, think like a man, which he did teach me to do. But, this is a skill that can be confusing to a young female adult, especially. So that father wound is serious because we excuse fathers. We let fathers off the hook all the time because they're men. Men can do whatever they want. And women, women are, motherhood isn't sainthood. I heard that from my same professor. She said, motherhood isn't sainthood. And sometimes the wait till your father gets home. How cruel is that? Let your dad be the bad guy. These father wounds are serious because we tend to let dads off the hook more than moms. But feminine energy is very important. And for people that don't believe in that, it's true. And a father wound is just as serious as a mother wound. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's that there seems to be this big, or at least there was for a while, a big tug of war between this masculine feminine piece, and I think that's a it. We encompass all of those aspects of us, and it's when we're repressing one or the other is when we get ourselves into trouble. And talking about when you said, wait till your father comes home, man, that was my mom all day long, and
It
I always
makes
say
dad the
that,
bad guy. It
yeah, it
makes
sure
dad
did.
the bad guy.
And that made in my there's 13 months between myself and my next brother, and I always say that we wore him out within the first 5 years of being on this planet, because we were just
Wow.
such shit disturbers, right? Just causing lots of trouble, and every other day it was wait till your father gets home, and the poor guy had to, he didn't know any better. He's trying to raise young family, and stressed to the
Right. And he
max.
has to come up. So your mom's a tattletale and your dad's the bad
Yeah,
guy when he gets home. And, in our house, my brother, oh my goodness, may he rest in peace, but he was a wild child. And very few people knew that in his later life. He always presented this attorney facade.
yeah.
And like, wow. And people would say, your brother's just so perfect. He's a saint. And I used to go, oh my gosh, the parties, it was like risky business in our house.
Yeah,
It was horrible.
yeah,
And yeah, and then he and my dad would get in fist fights. So violence was normalized to me. This was in a psychiatrist's home, everyone.
yeah,
And I almost took a polygraph test before I wrote this book because none of them are here to dispel that. And so I will gladly take one if I
yeah.
have to. And that is what stopped in my house the later in life when I said, you know what, if you all are just going to get mad at me if I say anything to anyone about anything, because I was pretty done keeping the family secrets in my 40s. And I didn't tell everybody by any means, but if it came out and they heard about it, I said, I'll just take a polygraph and I'll pass and you won't. And I'm okay with that. And you can pick the polygraph artist. I don't care who it is.
Yeah.
That's okay with me. And that finally stopped it. So I had to really navigate a way to confront. You have to be very careful when you confront the people who have hurt you, father, mother, or otherwise. But my dad really did come around. I had 10 great, really close years with him. And I worked in his office when I was younger. So it was nice to work with him as an adult and as a child and as an adult, because he did tell me one day he walked in a hotel room. We were out of town and he knocked on the door. It was about midnight. My dad didn't stay up. He went to bed at 8 o'clock at night. And he said, honey, I want to come in here and tell you something. I said, what? And he said, I like you. I said, you, so he said, well, I love you, but I like you too. And I don't like any women. I said, good to know. Thank you. I said, are you going to hug me or something? And he did. And it was so awkward because he was not that kind of guy. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, okay. And I had to learn to meet him where he was and accept that without being judgmental. That was the best he could do with what he had because he was abandoned.
Well, and that's a great point, right? Is being able to meet people where they're at and
Yes.
remove that judgment piece of it. The other part of the book I thought was interesting is that you counsel us to be careful to not overdo this journaling and talking too much about our stuff, because we tend to, just ingrain the bad stuff. And I thought that's
Yes.
interesting because there is this big push, especially for guys. Oh, we need to journal more. And then I talk about it with my guys. And then I thought that's a really good point. Like, what are we journaling about? And so I thought maybe you could spend a little bit of time speaking about that and about how we need to be conscious about how we're doing these, what we think are health practices or healing practices, and we could be doing more harm than good.
Oh, yes, I know a lot of therapists. You may, and I may, because you may send them to me, get letters on this. I'm not a big fan of journaling all about your feelings. I believe in venting and then reinventing. When I give journal assignments, I tell people you can journal your feelings, but then I want you to journal how you want to feel. Very rarely, as a solution-focused therapist, do I say, how does that make you feel? I can see that, or I can deduce that. I do ask it sometimes when I don't know, but I always have the better question of how do you want to feel? So you can write how you do feel, but you want to write how you want to feel. And I do believe in bullet points. I have a bullet point sitting right in front of me. I have a bullet point gratitude journal that I write in every day. And it's just 5 bullet points, things I'm grateful for. Like during COVID, I'm grateful for vaccines. I'm grateful for, the doctors who are inventing things to help us. I'm grateful for another day living. I would be
Absolutely.
very grateful. So I believe that bullet points and lists and getting your feelings out are good, but be careful if they're all negative. If you're going to vent, you need to do something to reinvent. And I do love bullet points, and men love bullet points. I mean, men.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dad. He taught me to act like a lady and think like a man.
There you
Although
go.
every book and everything I ever wrote did come from my journal after my brother passed away in Sedona on a bathroom floor. When I just got vertigo, I was so upset. I was dehydrated one day. I was hiking around a mountain
Mm-hmm.
and I started a journal and I said, wait a minute, I have to practice what I preach here. I'm going to not just journal about what happened. I'm going to journal about what I'm learning from this. So what I learned was the bones, like the marrow of the bone that is in this book and my e-courses. It
Wow.
was, yeah, I was just, I was laying on a tile floor because it was cool because I was just so hot in Sedona. I hiked around mountains for
Yeah.
days, miles, 30 days, just hiked and hiked by myself,
Wow.
working it out.
Yeah. That was so perfect. The analogy of the bone and the marrow, really getting into what's going on as opposed to dwelling on the negative side of it.
Yes. What am I learning from this?
Yeah, 100%. I also love that you wrote that and I'll quote you from the book. It says you harness the life-changing power of taking responsibility for speaking your truth as you feel it and know it. And that's really it's really powerful, because that's really all about what the work that I'm doing is about: being able to take responsibility, admit where you're at, have an understanding of who you are, and then now what do you want to become? How do you want to move forward with stuff? So I really like that you put that in there. But I do want to backpedal a little bit, and now I want to deal with the narcissist stuff, because you have quite a bit of information in there, and you provide 3 guidelines for handling a narcissist. I was wondering if you could explain that to our listeners today.
Well, I actually have a new one. I had it. I'll probably write a second book, something like that. Maybe the care and feeding of narcissists. So I think someone may have put a book like that. You just lower your expectations of them and heighten your expectations of yourself. But also, it's very important to know that you cannot argue with them. You have to make statements. Don't ask them why questions. Don't ask them why. Don't say, why are you so mean? Because you're getting, unlike my father, you get an answer of because you deserve it.
Right.
At least my father was a psychiatrist and he could be truthful and honest. Well, I'm a narcissist, but a narcissist usually don't do that, which makes me question if he even was one, because maybe he just felt like he was one.
Yeah.
But yeah, you cannot argue with a narcissist. You will not win. It's impossible. So is there a point you'd like me to discuss the most that would serve your audience well from the list of 3 things?
I was bad on me. I didn't take the 3 notes. I was just hoping you would expound on
Yeah, you
each
don't
of them a bit.
argue. Yeah, you
Don't
don't argue.
Yeah, don't ask why, right?
Don't ask why.
Can't think of the third.
And do learn that you need to take care of you, and don't get involved in the gaslighting and crazy making behavior of them.
Yeah, fair enough.
That gaslight, it's that lose-lose. They set you up to get you upset, and they feel happy when you feel miserable. And then you doubt yourself, and then you stay in those relationships even more.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened in my marriage. I kept saying, well, I must be the crazy one. I must be the crazy one. And you're not the crazy one. It's called crazy making behavior and gaslighting for a reason. They're setting you up to get you upset. Absolutely. And when you fall into it, and anyone who has been in a relationship with a narcissist and they're out there, it's like swimming in the ocean. They're out there. You cannot swim in the ocean and not be near a shark. You're just going to have them in your life. And arguing with them does very, very little good. Yeah. Asking why questions is accusatory. It'll set them on edge. So instead of saying, why are you so mean? Just say, you're so mean, and walk away. Don't argue. Don't explain. Take no offense, take no defense, and walk away to keep your sanity and sanctuary, because they'll try to push that threshold. Yeah, exactly. And I think you bring up an important point there as well, is that, while we're talking about it's being relationships and we have been, personal relationships in a marriage, for example, but we can be dealing with have a codependency with friends,
through family,
Yes.
through our work, and so that's also, I think, a great understanding that we should have, is that to get our mindset shifted, that it doesn't necessarily need to be about our spouse, that
Oh no.
our codependency can show up in a lot of different ways.
Oh, it just leaks out everywhere. It does everywhere if you're not careful. Especially men have a more clandestine kind of um, codependency trait. They want to be the fixers,
Mm-hmm.
the heroes, the rescuers, and sometimes they're self-avoiding. Women do the same thing, but men will, and they'll wear themselves out doing it. They really, really will.
Yeah.
And they have to be very, very careful because they're men and they think they can do it, just like women think women can do anything, a man can do anything. Not everyone can do everything for everyone. It's just you have to receive to give,
Yeah.
and there is a very fine blurry line between what's codependent and what is independent. And usually I tell people, if you're exhausted and you're resentful or you feel angry after you help someone or taken advantage of, you may have given from a codependent intention. Whereas if
Mm-hmm.
you just give something to somebody um, out of the pureness of your heart with no expectation in return, then that is compassionate, which is a
Yeah.
big difference.
There we go. That's awesome. Here's another great quote from your book. You said the opposite of love is not hatred, it's indifference. And so when I read that, that really hit me like a ton of bricks, because you're absolutely right. Because at least if there's hatred, that there's some passion left. But with indifference, that ship has long sailed. And
Yes.
and do we and I think about my previous marriage and how that indifference in the relationship was so prevalent, and how I would have been looking at that stage of my life. I would have been looking for, well, how much do we hate each other? Well, I guess we should stay together.
Yes.
And we shouldn't be together because we hate each other. But it wasn't that wasn't in existence. But what did exist big time was total indifference for the
Yes.
relationship and for everything. And so I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and how that, how you came to that understanding.
That understanding came to me one day, and it goes back to your I looked in a mirror one day toward the end of my 20-year marriage, and I said, I don't hate him anymore. I don't dislike him anymore, but I certainly hate and dislike the person I'm looking at right now.
Mm-hmm.
I looked up at my face and I had so much fear in it. And I had such a downtrodden look. I was like a happy, bubbly person. I thought, how could I allow someone to chisel me down like this for 20 years just because I had nowhere to go? I had everywhere to go if I thought about it. I had my own brain to go back to school, and he wouldn't let me go back to school. No, I could have gone back to school. What was he going to do? Kill me? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we buy into the lies they tell us because I was carrying that attachment from, you have to keep the secret, you have to do what I say, that obedient child. You have to be very careful about that. So I
Right.
had to take responsibility. I even wrote a song about that, and I said, it's all your fault, but only have me to blame, pretty much.
There you go.
It was a funny song, and a man cut it. I loved it that a man cut it because he had gone through something else. So I wrote it for a friend of mine, Mike Lawrence, and he cut the song, and it was like a Southern rock song. It was a very masculine song. And it was kind of my exit song, like my swan song, my last hurrah.
Right
And
on.
I realized, I said, wow, I've reached indifference toward him. But then I had compassion toward myself. And I said, I need to get me back. And I said, no, I don't need to get me back. I need to get my innocence returned like I was meant to be for the
Yeah.
first time. Because in the back of my closet, I kept a box named Beach House. He didn't know what BH meant, but I had shells in there and all these little things I collected, that because I really want to live near the ocean. I'm still not close enough, but I'm working my way there,
Right on.
and I'm pretty close. Yeah, I didn't see the ocean for almost 7 years of my marriage, and I was a certified scuba diver at 14 years of age,
Wow.
and he wouldn't let me do that. No, that was my fault. That's why I put a picture in the book of me scuba diving in
Yeah.
Hawaii. I just, yeah, went scuba diving. First thing I did was get in that water, put a tank
Absolutely.
on my back, and I was like, I'm a mermaid again. Yay.
Right on.
Yes. I got me back. I was indifferent toward him, but I was compassionate toward me. Yes.
There we go. Outstanding. So we touched a lot of stuff on on what codependency is all about, and then really the rest of the book. So about how it's almost about a 50-50 split. I'll suggest, where now the rest of the book is really about uncovering. We've uncovered all the nasty stuff about codependency, and then you start getting into look at how we can achieve this wholeness. And so I'm wondering if you can touch on some of the ideas and concepts that you share with us in the book about how we can regain or reclaim this wholeness.
Oh wow, that's my passion part, because it's the reinvent part. You can stay a
Yeah.
victim if you want to. I always say I was victimized.
Yeah.
I was victimized. I'm not just a survivor. That implies mere a pittance of a life, and that is not the kind of life that I have or want or work on every day. The first thing, absolute first thing, is to be conscious of your subconscious. There's a lot of neuroscience in that book.
Mm-hmm.
That the neuroscience is teaching you to pay attention to your vagus nerve. It's spelled VAGUS. Kind of like I said, your family's not Las Vegas. It doesn't have to stay in Vegas, but that's a different kind of vagus nerve. It's connected to your fight, flight, or frozen mechanisms. I'll spare a neuroscience lecture here, but very important to get in touch your consciousness with your subconscious. If you don't like to meditate, that's okay. You can just do it. You can walk and feel that nerve kick off. You can be in front of someone and just say, oh my gosh, they're making me sick to my stomach, or your chest tightens, and we all feel it in different places. So get conscious of your subconscious, recognize your triggers so you can neutralize your triggers, and then be good to yourself. Get in touch with you. You've been so hyper focused on everybody else and pleasing everyone else. What would please you? And that's where those lists came from at the end of the book. It's like I sat down one day and I said, okay, I don't know what I want anymore. What don't I want? I can start there. Like typical codependent question. Where do you want to go for dinner? I don't know. Fill in the blank, Alan.
Yeah. I don't know.
Wherever
Where do you
you
want to
want to go.
go?
Where do you want to go? That's the obvious answer.
Yeah.
So I tell people, can you at least start with what you don't want? Can you tell them, I don't want to eat hamburgers tonight? Tell them what you don't want. Then you can deduce from there what you do want. So that's where those came, because we hear so much about law of attraction and all these things, that buzzwords that go on, only think to the positive, only think about what you do want. Well, if you don't know what you want, you have to rewind the tape and go back. If you're so codependent, you don't know who you are and what you want anymore, you have to express what you don't want.
Yeah.
And then write the opposite. That's how I handle clients when they come in my office. I say, okay, what don't you want? I'm taking notes. They don't know what I'm doing over there. And at the end of the session, I said, okay, I know you said you don't know what you want. However, I did deductive reasoning, very masculine thinking, right? And I deduced from what you don't want, what you do want. I wrote the opposite. I hand them their own list and I said, add to this when you go home. Keep adding to this. That's what I'm helping people is add value, especially to men, because they get financially trapped in codependent relationships and they don't even know it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because one of the things that I did want to have you explain to us is that at the end of every chapter, you do have these two exercises, right? You have a revision exercise, and then you call this another exercise is this life list. And you've been referring to it throughout our conversation today about these bullets, but explain how you came up with these two concepts. And you've already touched on how you're using it from the healing and growth perspective, but talk about a little bit about how you came up with it and how it's worked in your practice.
I'm smiling because I love this part. I was doing some exercise. I don't even remember where I found it. And I forget the name of it, but somehow it was an ideal mate list, but I added that name to it. I don't know what even the list was called. It says, what's like the perfect, because I hadn't dated for 4 years and I made mistakes when I did. Oh my gosh, I relapsed immediately back into codependent traits, and I had to reroute and recycle and go back to therapy and fix all that. But the funny thing was, when I was making a list of don't, so I sat there, my first thing on the list was no, I don't one. I love animals. Okay. So, and I'm not a vegetarian, so I'm a hypocrite, but I put no hunting. I don't like, and everyone I had ever been around, the brothers, father, I got weary of it. I had been hurt so much myself. I lost my ability to be around where hunting was. Then I had on there, and I did still fish at the time. I don't anymore, but I put on there all these things that I wanted. And I'd say kindness, open-mindedness, good sense of humor, loves adventure, loves to travel, loves the water, scuba diving. And I looked at the list and I went, oh my gosh, this is me. Am I a narcissist? And I went, no, I want me. I want someone like me who doesn't try to change me. And that is what I later learned, and it's in the book. I later learned that's what's called the Michelangelo phenomenon. That the more you're alike, although opposites attract, they repel, like that magnetism we talked about when we first sat down.
Yeah.
They attract, but they repel over time because you try to change each other and butt heads. And I went, oh, if someone's a lot like you and you have the same interests, it just makes it so easy. It doesn't mean everything's the same, but wow, I have that now, and it's like, oh, great, I can just go do what I want. He doesn't care.
Yeah. Right on.
And he can do what he wants, and I don't care. Yes.
Exactly.
It's not that you don't care. You give them freedom, which is a lot different than saying you don't care. You do care about the person, but you give them freedom to do what they want. You don't try to change or control them.
Yeah, you actually have
freedom.
You actually feel good about it, right? You feel good that they're doing the things that they enjoy, and because you're getting to be able to do the same thing for yourself, and that there isn't this tug of war or anything underlying that's trying to demean that. And so it brings strength to the relationship because both can experience life the way they want to, and still have a high regard for the relationship. So I think it's beautiful.
Yes, and so the lists are helpful because at the end you discard the what you don't want list, and it's a very ceremonious thing that people can do or not do. It's up to them. This book is for them. It's not for me. It's not a one size fits all. You do what you want with it. That's why I have those revision exercises. If you don't like meditation, and you can go to YouTube, I'm loading them up now. Those meditations are available there, so you don't have to read them and do them. They're presented for you, so you can just shut your eyes and go with it. They'll all be short. I don't believe in keeping things long that way. But if you don't like the meditation, then the list is your internal thoughts. It's a form of meditation to put a pen on paper. That's why I tell people, just that we talked about earlier, be careful when you write bad stuff on paper. Be careful to write that opposite. Yeah. And then they ceremoniously release that negative list at the end. It's like, so you're only left with what's right, because the bad side's the left list and the right is the good list. So I tell people you're only left with what's right, because that is exactly what I did. That's why I'm laughing, because that's what I did. That's exactly how I did it. I went, oh my goodness. Okay. I did it with everything in my life.
There you go. Well, see, and that's the
what don't I want financially? What do I want? What don't I want? Yes.
Yeah. And see, and that's what I really liked about
scientific.
Yeah, and that's what I really liked about the list, and that they showed up more from. I had a sneaky suspicion it showed up more than just from something I learned out of a book and through getting your degrees, and that this must have been something that Mary's worked over in her life and said this works. And so I'm going to introduce it to people.
I just took my life. I took, because we all have, people feel like they have fragments, but they're not. We have facets. And what do they do with a real jewel? They cut around the flaws to make the facet shine. So I said, I'm going to take every facet of my life: financial, spiritual, mental, emotional, ideal mate. I said, I'm going to write what I don't want, because it's going to help me know what I do want. Because when you live with someone who's narcissistic or abusive, you really don't know what you want anymore. You don't. And you have done it, Alan. So they kind of browbeat it out of you. It's either verbal abuse, stonewalling, criticism, whatever vehicle it came to you. To undo it is by repetition, which is the same way you got conditioned, by repetition. That's just straight up neuroscience to that.
Absolutely. Well, Mary, I want to thank you for spending so much time with me today. This was so great. I'm really grateful that you sent a copy of the pre-screening copy of the book. And just want to let everybody know that Mary's book's going to be released on August 31st. You can get it on Amazon. I'll put links to it in the show notes for today's podcast. And she also has a practice, I said earlier, it's at winterhavencounseling.com if you're in the Florida area. And I know that she does have a phone, so you can call, and she does do Zoom. So make sure you reach out to Mary.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you so much for spending time with me again today, and look forward to touching base again in the future.
Thank you. And I do want to shout out my publisher. I had a different publisher at first. I'll spare that story, but HCI Publishers allowed me to be me. That is so rare. I did not have one publisher before I had another. So I'm very thankful, and people need to find people who let them be themselves. That is the number one way to not be codependent. Hang around people who let you be you. And thank you, Alan, because you always let me be me. And I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you.
So here's one of the takeaways I had from that conversation with Mary. You see, there's a complete spectrum of how codependency shows up in our lives. And it usually has something to do with our childhood experiences. See, and that's where attachment styles will come into play. And in the Awakened Man Academy, I walk men through a process where they get to learn their attachment style. So why is that important? Well, it helps reveal maybe there's parts of our lives that we do have a bit of codependency in, not just in our primary relationships, in our marriages, but also through work, friends, and other aspects, as we talked about in today's interview. But the only way that you're going to learn any of that stuff is you have to take action. And the first thing I recommend you do is join the Hero's Quest. It's a 90-day mentoring program that will raise at least one standard, or many standards, in at least one area of your life. And to make it easy for you, I'm going to provide a link somewhere on this page that will give you an opportunity to speak one-on-one with me, where we can really dive into what it is that you're looking to work on and see if there's a fit between yourself and myself. You see, I say that because not all men are ready to make a commitment. They're ready to talk a good game, but they're not necessarily ready to walk it. And so it's important that both of us spend time to get an opportunity to understand what it is that we're bringing to the table. But the men that do commit, I can tell you, make huge strides in their life. So if you're that kind of man and you're ready to make a change, then I look forward to working with you in the Awakened Man program. Stay strong, my brothers. Aho.
Thank you for listening to the Evolving Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.